restoration of democracy. But how democratic do you think it can be, or how sustainable would a democratic future there be when it has been forced by a foreign power through violence?
It has not been forced by, it's not forced by violence. First of all, this was very much a capture operation, and it has played out exactly as I have said over at least my last 10 television interviews. They have taken out the command and control, the power to respond and attack United States forces without civilian casualties, or, and doing everything possible to disrupt the illicit financial flows of illicit oil, narcotics, and to a lesser extent gold, and to respond. They have not attacked U.S. civilians, and the Venezuelans have been pleading to try and get this criminal organization out, and that's exactly what they have done. They have captured a criminal, the head of the criminal organization, which is Maduro, and his wife, who are indicted, and their nephews have been tried in the United States for drug trafficking, and also they're wanted there's an arrest warrant for crimes against humanity, and as well for torture, and in the UN. They're very damning. There's 18,000 political prisoners currently being tortured just since 2018, and so they have captured a capo and taken him out. What happens with the rest of the enclave? As he should have done himself. So what happens to the rest of the enclave depends on them. There is a Venezuelan political structure that was voted by the Venezuelan people, ready to step into the presidential palace, which is what the Venezuelan people voted for in a 3-1 landslide. So it's there. There's a president, there's a vice president, there's a ministerial cabinet, there are aides, and all sorts of things. And Venezuela was, up until Chavez, the longest running democracy in Latin America.
And I want to take you to Santiago in Chile, because there are scenes there which were much more obvious a minute or two ago. Now it just looks like a crowd of people, but I can tell you that there are scenes of people in Santiago celebrating what has happened in Venezuela, celebrating the as yet not official demise of Nicolás Maduro as president of Venezuela. Now remember, we have had elections in Chile quite recently, and we had an election dominated by themes of security, immigration and crime that was actually won by the far-right wing José Antonio Cast. He is president of Chile, and he beat the governing left-wing coalition. So the country shifted towards the right, and as you can see here, the people who have come out in Santiago are displaying their support of what has happened in Venezuela, their support potentially of that American action and of the removal of President Maduro. As we mentioned earlier, with Ione, what's happened in Venezuela will surely have reverberations across Latin America, with lines being drawn across different nations as to who will be supporting what has happened in Venezuela and who will be worried about it and critical. We have already heard from Colombia huge criticism of what has happened. I just want to bring you, if we can come back to me for a second, just bring you a new line coming into us from the United States, some significant information. It's been posted by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and he has said this on social media. He said that he's spoken to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who told him in a phone call that Nicolás Maduro has been arrested by US personnel and will stand trial on criminal charges in the United States. The senator also posted that the kinetic action we saw tonight was deployed to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant. Reporting on his conversation with Mr. Rubio, he said, Secretary of State Mike Lee said, he anticipates no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in US custody. He also commented that this action likely falls within the president's inherent authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect US personnel from an attack, an actual or imminent attack. Remember, we spoke to our expert in international law about what constitutes breaking international law if you attack another country. Let's also bring you a tweet now from Pam Bondi. Let me just see if I can find it. I can't actually read that from where I am, but the US Attorney General, Pam Bondi, I'm being told, has tweeted, and she has said this: Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. They will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil, in American courts. On behalf of the entire US DOJ, Department of Justice, I would like to thank President Trump for having the courage to demand accountability on behalf of the American people. And a huge thank you to our brave military who conducted the incredible and highly successful mission to capture those 2 alleged international narco traffickers. So you have it right there. Those are the charges which will be put in front of Nicolas Maduro if and when he arrives on American soil, as we believe he will. The main charges will be on drugs and terrorism against Venezuela's president and his wife. Well, let's dig a little bit more deeply into what has happened. Our global affairs reporter Mimi Swaby is here. Mimi, good to talk to you. We're just hearing there about the charges against President Maduro. So just remind viewers who are watching this at home what exactly the background is. President Maduro obviously has been in power since 2013, since the death of Hugo Chavez, but the government is widely considered illegitimate by the international community.
That's correct. From the 2024 elections, it is widely considered that Nicolas Maduro rigged the election and declared victory when, in fact, the opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, the candidate Edmundo Gonzalez, won by a landslide. Now, following that very disputed election, he claimed power and really cracked down on political repression. We saw thousands of individuals arrested. Protests erupted in the streets, and we saw a crackdown on an extreme level. Now, this is on top of nearly 8 million Venezuelans who have fled the country since he first came into power in 2013, largely due to political repression, alongside economic hardship and other humanitarian issues. But he's very much consolidated his power and relies heavily on the military to do so. Nicolas Maduro has been warned repeatedly now, intensifyingly, in the last few months since the US started their operation in early September with these numerous strikes on alleged vessels carrying drugs from Venezuela through the South Caribbean Sea, as well as the Pacific Ocean, that they wanted to fight drugs, which they say Nicolas Maduro heads a cartel, Cartel de los Soles, largely from the military that supposedly has a strong root due to the military. Those Soles, the Suns, are a symbol of ranking with Venezuelan military officials, and this is something he has denied. But it's been increasing pressure we've seen. They've said that he heads these drug operations, he is an illegitimate leader, and we've been seeing strikes, oil tankers seized, a land strike recently, and now an unprecedented operation in Venezuela, extracting the disputed leader and his wife, now supposedly heading for the US.
And I really want to make it clear to viewers at home that although we say this is an illegitimate government, this is still a sovereign, independent state. And I'm pretty sure that other Latin American countries will be extremely worried about the precedent this sets, that the US feels that it's able to dive into another country, an independent sovereign state, extract the leader and put that leader on trial. This is going to worry Latin Americans, isn't it?
Hugely. Many will remember the era of gunboat diplomacy from the US, where the US essentially went into countries, meddled and toppled regimes it didn't see fit to govern, and it was a really bloody, destructive period. Now, President Trump says he is the president of peace. However, all eyes in the region and the global community will be on what happens next, and specifically what actions the US take next. The idea that extracting and presumably removing Nicolas Maduro from power for the opposition, who is very heavily backed by the US and Donald Trump specifically, to move in is deceptively simple. That is not going to happen efficiently or very simply. Maduro's inner circle, 4 key players are very much holding fort. We've seen all 4 of those, including the vice president, the foreign minister, and the Minister of Internal Affairs, make public statements and really rally Venezuelans, saying we are going to stand strong, calling arms and deploying police forces across the country, as well as civilian militia, to crack down on any Venezuelans celebrating. They really are kind of holding power at the moment. We've seen Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, seemingly exercising power. Constitutionally, she is kind of next in command. But interestingly, lots of people are looking at Diosdado Cabello, who is kind of the second in command. He's the Minister of Internal Affairs. He is very much going to be in the spotlight, as well as trying to kind of fill that power vacuum. The forced removal of Nicolas Maduro has left. But it will be over the coming days that we'll see who actually takes up that power and if they can do it effectively.
Mimi, thank you for that. Stay there if you can, Mimi. I'm going to come back to you to talk a little bit more in detail about this. But I think if we can now cross live and speak to Venezuelan lawyer Mariano de Alba, who's also an associate fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. It's good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on BBC News. Let me ask you, first of all, for your reaction to the events in Venezuela.
Well, I think this is a groundbreaking development. Obviously, it's too early to tell how everything's going to end. Venezuela has been previously in this sort of situation, most notably when Hugo Chavez died. Many people thought that would lead to democracy again in Venezuela. That did not happen. So right now, I think that the whole country, obviously, I should correct myself. The majority of the country sees this as a potentially positive development, but at the same time, there's a lot of expectation as to what will happen next. I think that the Venezuelan armed forces are going to have the responsibility of making a decision of where this goes. And at the same time, we cannot discard retaliation by people from the government against hundreds of political prisoners that are still imprisoned. And also there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the streets of Caracas and Venezuela as to what will happen in the next few hours and days.
I want to ask you about that because I touched on it when I was speaking to our reporter, Mimi, but I want to also underline the fact that this is an unprecedented move by the United States in a country that is independent and sovereign. And whatever one might think of the government in Venezuela, how difficult will this make it for the US going forward? And how much anxiety will this create amongst some other Latin American countries?
Yeah, I think it's a very grave precedent, not only for Latin America, but for the whole world order. However, I should also mention two key facts, right? The first one, you already mentioned it, Maduro was exercising power not in a legitimate manner. He lost resoundingly the presidential elections in July last year. And the second is that Maduro was also under a U.S. indictment for basically narco trafficking since March 2020. Obviously, that doesn't, according to international law, that does not open the door for a military operation inside Venezuela to extract the person that was effectively exercising the presidency from power. But I think that, in a sense, this sets a very worrisome precedent because today is the U.S., but tomorrow it could be another regional or world power deciding that it's going to try to impose its will in another country, even if that means violating the tenets of the world order that was established in 1945, namely the prohibition against the use of force.
And also another thing, I guess, that people will be thinking about watching this at home is there seems to be a lack of a clear post-Maduro plan from the US. We don't know what is going on in terms of the next steps. So doesn't this increase the risk of a violent power struggle within the country?
Yes, it's possible. I think that I don't foresee a lot of violence. The vast majority of Venezuelans will stay at home today waiting to see what happens. What is true is that right now, as I said before, the armed forces will have to make a decision, and they have two options. Either they stand with Chavismo, with Maduro's successors, with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, perhaps also the Minister of Interior that your colleague was alluding to, or they decide to perhaps negotiate with the U.S. and allow the return of the man who was elected on July last year to exercise the presidency, who is Edmundo González Urrutia. He's currently in exile in Spain. Also, the leader of the opposition is outside Venezuela right now, Maria Corina Machado, who recently won the Nobel Prize. I think that the outlook here is totally unclear, and I think that the Venezuelan military right now, if you push me, they think that they see that the possibility of a military operation, boots on the ground from the U.S. is unlikely, so they might try to hold on to power, supporting Chavismo. However, obviously that undercarries the risk that the U.S. is willing to undertake further waves of military operations as the one that we saw in the last hours.
But I also think, I suppose, the trouble is that the Supreme Court judges, the military hierarchy particularly, are likely to be extremely fearful, are they not, of handing power over to opposition leaders and parties who they've tried and they've imprisoned. They themselves could then be tried and imprisoned in the future, and so on and so forth. Would they not need guarantees, do you think, of some sort of amnesty to even contemplate risking handing power over? It's not going to be as easy as one might imagine, regime change.
No, it's not. It's not going to be easy. And basically, if the opportunity arises, the reconstruction of Venezuelan democracy and of Venezuelan economy, it's going to be a work of decades at the minimum. At the same time, I have to say that the Venezuelan opposition has always operated under the assumption that if you remove Chavez from power, if you remove Maduro from power, the whole system of Chavismo will collapse. So that remains to be seen. I do think that if the Venezuelan military supports the legitimate president, supports the Venezuelan opposition gaining power, we could see important fragments of the Supreme Court, of the National Assembly, either going into hiding or basically opening the door also for a Venezuelan transition. But as you say, that will undertake a very difficult and profound negotiation as to what the terms of that transition will be, guarantees for the people leaving power, and so forth.
OK, well, thank you so much, Mariana de Alba, Venezuelan lawyer who is at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. It's been good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. Let's bring you some more lines that we're getting here this afternoon. One from the UK Foreign Office, which has come out to say that it's advising against all travel to Venezuela for UK citizens. That is the very latest from the Foreign Office. We also have the Attorney General in the United States, Pam Bondi, who has tweeted on social media in the last hour or so. And we have become a lot clearer now on what charges are being put in front of President Maduro. I'm going to read you what she's written. Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. They will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. On behalf of the entire US DOJ, the Department of Justice, I would like to thank President Trump for having the courage to demand accountability on behalf of the American people, and a huge thank you to our brave military who conducted the incredible and highly successful mission to capture these two alleged international narco traffickers. So that is the latest from the US Attorney General Pam Bondi, giving us a lot more insight into what charges we are going to be hearing in terms of President Nicolas Maduro. Well, let's just take you live now to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who joins me now. And Lise, good to talk to you. I guess the big question now that we were just touching on with Mariana de Alba, the Venezuelan lawyer there, is the what next scenario. It doesn't feel like there is a solid plan from the United States. And yet, this will have taken months of planning.
Marion, this is always the big question. Every time there is a major U.S. indeed US-led military intervention in another country, be it Iraq in 2003, Afghanistan in 2001. The big question is, what is your plan for the day after? And it's not clear to anyone whether there is a plan for the day after. What we have seen in recent months is a steady buildup of military pressure on Nicolas Maduro, on the Venezuelan authorities. They never really came clear, although it was widely assumed that this also had a political objective, and I think this is what we are seeing unfolding today. But as always, whether it's in its regime change in all but name, but as you've been discussing, will it end, Chavismo, will that end with the removal simply of President Maduro? There's still his powerful vice president, Delcy Rodriguez. There's the defense minister who's been speaking out this morning. There's the interior ministry. What happens to them? We've heard through a U.S. senator that the Secretary of State of the U.S., Marco Rubio, has said that is the end of military action for now. Is he expecting that all of these others will simply melt away? Or is this personal for the U.S.? Will they be willing to work with other officials? What about the prominent opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Maria Corina Machado? Will she expect now to go into Caracas and be the new leader? These are big questions, Marianne, most of all for the people of Venezuela, but also for the wider region. We're already getting reports that Venezuelans are now trying to stream across the border into neighboring Colombia. Colombia also already hosts many refugees, those who were critics of President Maduro. Now there's a different kind of a flow, and that is the supporters of Nicolas Maduro. So people will be holding their breath, even those who wanted to see the back of Nicolas Maduro. The concern now is what kind of a transition, if it is a transition, will there be?
And the other interesting point that I want to talk to you about, Lise, is the reverberations of this unprecedented move by the US globally. I mean, this is, action on an independent sovereign state, whatever you might think of the government, to extract a president, to remove him and his wife and take them potentially to American soil, to indict them on various charges. What is this going to mean for the global world order? What kind of anxiety and worry will this bring about within Latin America in particular?
Well, look at the reaction so far. Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, was asked for his reaction. Would he condemn U.S. military actions targeting the leader of a country, as have leading members of Parliament? And he said, no, we've got to look at the facts. The Britain, as well as many other European countries, they had concerns about the illegitimate elections which brought Nicolas Maduro to power. But they would also be deeply uneasy about this military aggression and the fact that Sir Keir Starmer is saying, well, I have to talk to President Trump. I have to wait and see, although it's abundantly clear to everyone exactly what has happened in the dark of night. Similarly, the EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, she has also expressed what has been the broader European discontent with the rule of President Maduro, but she expressed concern for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Venezuela. So the reaction has been very mixed. You have countries, left-leaning countries in Latin America like Colombia, which have been very quick to condemn the actions. Right-wing governments, some of whose leaders have been openly backed by President Trump. They came to power in recent elections. They're not saying very much. They are watching very closely. A country like Iran, who only 24 hours ago was being threatened by President Trump with possible military action, came out very quickly and strongly condemned this blatant aggression. So it's very much a mixed picture. And I'll end by saying Russia came out and condemned the military actions of the United States. It has for decades been condemning the American penchant for regime change, but quietly the Russian leader, the Chinese president, they must all be watching closely and will no doubt see this as an affirmation of the way the New World Order works, with what are being called the strong men with their spheres of influence. The United States has its backyard in South America. Russia has, of course, its eyes on Ukraine. And just days ago, China carried out military exercises widely seen as a rehearsal for its eventual attacks on Taiwan, which it regards as an integral part of the Chinese mainland.
Lise, thank you very much indeed. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, there with her analysis. Well, I just want to take you, if I may, to the scene in Caracas. This is downtown Caracas, and we brought you there before, but I want to take you there once more. You can see there's a very quiet and peaceful, not particularly big from this angle at least, protest supporting President Maduro, who has, as you know, been removed from the country by American forces. You can hear there a bit of music in the background and people standing together in support of President Maduro. It's just coming up to 9 o'clock in the morning local time. Remember, this all happened earlier on in the morning, about 2 a.m. local times. That's the scene in Caracas there. Let's take you to Chile now and to Santiago. A different scene here. This is the scene of people in support of what has happened to President Maduro. Now, remember, there have been elections in Chile very recently. A right-wing president, an ultra-conservative president, has been elected. And also there are quite a few Venezuelan immigrants in Chile as well. They are perhaps now there's hope that there will be some sort of resolution to this regime in Venezuela, and those many people who have left the country and come to Chile can potentially think about going back. As mentioned earlier, Lise mentioned lots of people actually now trying to leave Venezuela, but at least here we're seeing a lot of support from the Chileans for what has happened to Nicolas Maduro and what is happening in Venezuela. There, the scene live in Santiago. Well, Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, is one potential new leader for the country, although there's obviously a huge amount of confusion as to what happens next. My colleague Lucy Hawkins interviewed her in Oslo last month after she won the Nobel Peace Prize. She asked her about the possibility of a US military intervention and what the opposition would support.
Also, President Trump has talked about the possibility of strikes on Venezuelan soil. And it is difficult sometimes with President Trump to figure out exactly what it is that he means. But is that something that you would support, a US military strike on Venezuelan soil?
Look, President Trump has offered Maduro, and he has said it publicly several times, to go through a peaceful process to dismantle the criminal structure, and has insisted that the criminal activities have to stop, which has not happened on the contrary. So we didn't want a war. We didn't look for it. The Venezuelan people want to live, in democracy and freedom, justice. It was Maduro who declared a war on the Venezuelan people with state terrorism and abroad with narco-terrorism.
But is that a reluctant yes, then, that you would support that?
What we have asked, but I've been very insistent in this, is the international community to help us stop the flows of resources, criminal resources, which are used by that regime for repression of the Venezuelan people, or innocent Venezuelans. Where those resources come from? Drug trafficking, gold trafficking, even human trafficking. And many of these resources end up in, the financial systems of democracies in Latin America or in Europe. And what we have asked is we need to cut those inflows. And a very important part of those resources come from the drug activities. So we clearly believe that an international coalition to dismantle this industry should be put in place.
That's the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, talking to my colleague Lucy Hawkins after winning that Nobel Peace Prize. Her whereabouts are unknown, but she is, of course, a hugely important political figure within Venezuela, and all eyes will be on what she does and says next. Let's dive a little bit more deeply now into the world of Venezuelan politics. Our global affairs reporter, Mimi Swaby, is here with me in the studio. Mimi, you've spoken to people in Caracas. I'm sure there is a lot of anxiety and worry there. What have people been saying?